Greg, welcome. We're very glad to have you here in San Antonio in our studio today. Want to find out more about you, but let me first read your bio so everybody knows a little bit about you, and then we'll start with a couple of questions. Greg Henson serves as the president of Kairos University, one of the largest and most diverse communities of competent-based theological education in the world. And we definitely want to talk about that. As a published author and international speaker, his work on innovation, theological education, organizational transformation, a lot of Asians in there.
So many.
And governance has been used by seminaries, universities, churches, and nonprofits on 6 continents. He is the father of 4 amazing kids and the husband to his favorite theologian and preacher. And that's probably the most important part of your life.
It is by a long shot.
Greg has a doctorate of ministry from Sioux Falls Seminary and a master's of business administration from Benedictine University. Prior to his work at Kairos, Greg served as pastor. He has a heart. The heart of his ministry is a desire to cultivate followers of Jesus who flourish in their vocations. Mm-hmm. Let me read a little bit about Kairos, and we definitely want to talk about Kairos University. In 1858, which is the same year our association...
I saw that on your door
when
we walked in.
Association was created. A small group of church leaders in Rochester, New York, saw the need to develop followers of Jesus to serve their local communities. Nearly 170 years later, with the advent of partners and by the grace of God, that vision has grown into Kairos University, one of the largest and most diverse accredited systems of competency-based theological education in the world. Kairos is a global community with a campus in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, offices in Canada and the United States, and partners around the world. Kairos University is accessible from wherever you are located. Currently, we have students, faculty, mentors, and staff from over 60 different countries. Quite a large fingerprint.
It has grown quite a bit over the years.
We would like to get to know you first.
Yeah.
Tell us about your faith journey and coming to faith in Christ, and kind of how God has guided you, and how you ended up at Kairos.
Yeah, it's so great to be here. I've already enjoyed the conversations we've had, and so I think that's a great question to start with, because for me, everything starts with Jesus anyway. And so I grew up in the church. I'm a pastor's kid, and so I always joke, like, there's 2 kinds of pastor's kids. There's the rebellious kind, and there's the one who is Bible trivia, knows everything, and I was that one. So I grew up and I just knew everything about the Bible, like the content of the Scripture. So I knew all the stories. I'd win every Bible trivia contest, but maybe didn't really have a good understanding of why any of that mattered. So like, I was the kid who at vacation Bible school would make bets or wagers with my teachers. Like, I bet I can say the books of the Bible in under 19 seconds. And like, no, you can't. I'm like, well, if I can, you owe me a milkshake. And then I would do it and I'd get a milkshake. And so that was kind of what the Bible was to me. And then when I was in 7th grade, I was coming home from a basketball camp. My brother was driving. We were in a minivan. Mercury Villager was the brand of minivan. And he got forced off the road. We were on the highway, and he got forced off the road, and the van flipped 3.5 times. Wow. And the Villager, that van was designed that in the case of a rollover, the back windows would pop out, so the glass wouldn't shatter on the people that are in the car, which is a really great design if you have your seatbelt on. And so I didn't have my seatbelt on and flew out the window of the van. And the doctors say I flew for about 80 feet, and then I hit the gravel shoulder that's on the side of the road, and I skipped, they say, like a rock across a creek, but on a gravel shoulder.
How old were you?
I was seventh grade. So was that
12,
13? Yeah.
And It's amazing that you even survived.
Well, so I went to the hospital, and I broke every bone on the left side of my face, shattered my jaw. It was basically, my head looked like a football. I had swelling on my brain and all of these things. And the doctors told my parents that your son is either going to die or have brain damage for the rest of his life. And this is where some people like to joke, well, you didn't die. So maybe that explains some things. But I went from that to I was well enough to attend church camp 8 weeks later. And so I did. I shattered my jaw. My mouth was wired shut and all of that. And about 4 weeks after that accident, my mom comes in. And it's a long time ago, but I still get emotional about this. My mom comes in and says, I have somebody on the phone that wants to talk to you. And I'm like, okay. So I go and I talk to her. And it turns out this woman who was on the phone, she saw the car accident. She was about 4 cars behind the accident. Just so happened, she attended the church that my mom grew up in. And so she knew me. She didn't know that I was the person in the accident, but she knew me. And she just so happened to be the woman who was in charge of the prayer ministry at the church. And so she started praying for whoever it was.
Yeah.
And then started the prayer chain at her local church. So by the time I got to the hospital, I didn't know this, but by the time I got to the hospital, hundreds of people were already praying for me.
For you.
Yeah. And so she, when we were talking on the phone, for her, this was like, oh my gosh, like you're alive and you're talking and you're fine. And like, this is such an answer to prayer. And like, this was a really big deal for her. And I'm the whole time like, this is probably the first time I'm like, oh my gosh, like maybe there's something to this following Jesus thing that's more important than knowing the words that are in a Bible, right? That's important. The Bible matters. But it's probably my first experience with, prayer has power. And following Jesus is an important thing in terms of the whole ways it connects to your body and the way you engage in your faith. And so that's where faith, I would say, became mine. Like, so I'd always believed in Jesus, but that was where I was like, oh, there's more to following Jesus than what you know in your head. And that's kind of where discipleship became a big part of my life and paying attention to that. And the rest of the story is me leaning into, well, what does discipleship mean? How do you do that?
So at that point, when faith became real for you, I would imagine a sense of purpose also, that God spared my life when I ought to be dead, and there's a sense of purpose for my living.
For sure. And that's progressively become more clear, right?
Yeah.
I think we always can attest to the fact that God is at work. Like we know that, right? God is working. But it's only when you kind of stop and look back that you can actually see it, right?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, that's where God was working. And so I'm only 13, 7th grade or whatever. I was like, oh, like having some awake, but then later in high school and then in college. And then there's more of these times where you be, oh, like this dot connects to that dot. And so that was where it started for me. But then when I was in college, I helped plant a church and I served as a pastor and a worship leader. And all my formal education, though, was in business. So like you said, I have an MBA, but all my formal training and education is in business, but all my work is in the church. And so it wasn't until after college, I worked for the Boy Scouts as an executive for a couple years before I was invited to come work at Northern Seminary. And if I'm honest with you, when they invited me to come work at Northern Seminary, which is a Baptist seminary in Chicago, I said yes to the fact that they asked me because they were going to pay me twice what I was getting paid at the Boy Scouts. It's not because I cared about theological education or even knew what it was. It's like, well, I know what Northern is because, I know people that went there, but I don't really know anything about it. But in that first year is when I realized, oh, like my passion for discipleship and the local church and my ability to work with systems and business and process, all of that comes together here. Yeah. And so that's where it really came. It's like, oh, this is where I'm supposed to be.
That's where all the dots connect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that first year, I was like, oh yeah. And so God allowed us to do some great stuff at Northern, and then I was invited to work at Sioux Falls, which now became Kairos University. And so when someone asks, how did I end up where I am? I always say, well, that's God's fault. It's just a constant listening to what God is asking us to do.
Well, obviously, he's wired you to do what you're doing. How long have you been at Kairos now?
they appointed me in October 2013. So I'm in year 12 now, which is just amazing to me, because sometimes it feels like it was yesterday. Like I still sometimes refer myself as the new president, but that's not true anymore.
Well, what has happened in 12 years? I mean, obviously things were different. Mm-hmm. That's prior to COVID. A lot of things changed in COVID. Mm-hmm. What has happened? What are the major things that have happened in 12 years?
Yeah, well, some of those can be articulated in numbers. So when I started at Sioux Falls Seminary, which is now Kairos, we changed our name to Kairos University. Sioux Falls Seminary, we had about 150 students, and they all lived within driving distance of Sioux Falls. Today, we have about 1,600 people who are earning degrees, but about another 5,000 people who are part of the community. So it's close to 7,000 learners, and they're spread out all over. We don't have anybody in in Antarctica. And so if you know anybody that's like a scientist in Antarctica that wants to be a student, let me know. But so that's kind of the scope of the change. But where it started was us as a school, as a community early on in 2013, 2014, asking the question, how do we think about theological education so that it's affordable, accessible, relevant, and faithful? So instead of, how do we put it online or how do we do this? It was really coming back to the value of it needs to be affordable, it needs to be accessible, it needs to be relevant or contextual, and we got to do all that by staying and still stay faithful to the unshakable truth of God's word. We can't move away from that. And that's kind of what has driven us the whole time. And the big shifts that we made were kind of a philosophical shift towards theological education is discipleship. At the end of the day, if everybody has master's degrees or bachelor's degrees or doctoral degrees or whatever, but we haven't actually cultivated followers of Jesus, then we've failed. And so for us, we kind of say, start with discipleship, and then if we do that, we can also award degrees. But if we get those switched, if we want to sell degrees, that's our job, we may not actually get disciples. So that's kind of the big shift is discipleship first, degrees second, and affordable, accessible, relevant, faithful.
Talk about the degree part. What degrees are offered?
So we have 2 bachelor's degrees. We have a Bachelor of Arts in Christian Thought and Practice, so it's like a Christian Ministries degree, and then we have a Bachelor of Arts in Leadership, which is still faith-based, but it's more leadership-focused. Then we have a master's degrees. We have 2 counseling master's degrees, so marriage and family therapy, but also a kind of clinical, they're both clinical, but they're different types of counseling. Then we have a Master of Arts degree, which can kind of be customized to any, so if you want to do a Master of Arts and focus on youth ministry or missions or leadership or whatever, that's kind of that one. And then we have a Master of Divinity, which is the kind of traditional degree that a lot of people take. And then at the doctoral level, we have a Doctor of Ministry, which is for people who have already done a master's of some sort. We have a Doctor of Professional Counseling, so those are for clinicians who are wanting to go deeper. And then we have 2 research doctoral degrees, a Doctor of Theology and a Doctor of Philosophy, so PhD and THD. And when we started, we had just a few master's degrees. So we've also kind of expanded our degree programs over the years.
So accrediting, I know you're accredited through ATS. Talk a little bit about that, the significance of ATS. So, I'm a graduate of Southwestern, which is ATS accredited. So the importance of such accreditation, because in some ways it's a validation or recognition of the level of education that you guys provide.
Correct. Yeah, accreditation I think carries two components. One is what you just described. It is kind of a validation of the quality, right? And so we are accredited by ATS. We're also regionally accredited, so which is by the Higher Learning Commission. We have basically the highest levels of accreditation you can get in the United States, which I think is important in terms of all the stuff you said. From a biblical perspective, we suggest that accreditation is important because it follows the biblical principle of peer accountability. Like we are accredited partly because it's important for us to submit to the accountability of peers. And so that's what accreditation is. It's other schools looking at what we're doing and saying, actually, you're doing a good job, or you need to work on this or not.
And part of that accreditation, is it what, every 10 years they come and look at everything and reassign?
Yeah, it kind of varies. So there is this recurring assessment process that happens. And our last visit from both of our big accreditors, ATS and HLC, we got 10 years from ATS.
Yeah.
They can say less. They can say, oh, you're doing okay, but we're going to come back in 5 years, or we're going to come back in 7 years. They gave us 10, which is the best you can get.
Yeah.
And then the Higher Learning Commission also gave us the best that you can get.
And that, once again, goes back to accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Being accountable to outside bodies. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a very good thing.
Somebody other than us thinks that we're doing a good job.
Yeah.
That's
somebody that looks at everybody else.
Yep. Yeah. It's been
good.
really helpful.
Talk about the competency-based part.
Yeah.
Not a lot of schools. A lot of schools are more, you read the book, you write the papers, but talk about the competency part.
Yeah. So for us, it's called now competency-based theological education. That's the official name for it. We didn't actually call it that when we started. When we started it way back in 2014, we were one of the first schools to think about it. We called it theologically informed outcome-based education, which is this idea that if we love Jesus, there should be a certain way we think about education, right? It's not just get a bunch of information on our heads. It should be more inclusive than that. It should include your character. It should include your craft. It should include, like, if you profess that Jesus is Lord, but then go oppress somebody, then you don't actually believe that Jesus is Lord, right? Your actions should match your words.
Should affect your daily life.
Correct.
Outside classroom.
Yeah. It's if you can write a great sermon but can't actually preach, then you're not a good preacher, right? And so that was what we were trying to get at, is how do we, so the phrase we use for that is called integrated knowing. We wanted to say, we want to pay attention to content, character, and craft, not just one piece of that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the philosophical. And then if you're going to do that, it turns out, well, the best way to do that is in context. Like one of my colleagues at another seminary says the best way to learn how to lead a church is in the church.
Yeah.
And so maybe we should leverage that. So competency-based theological education for us is content, character, and craft rooted in the context of a local church. So that, and maybe local ministry or vocation. Like we've had fighter pilots in our programs. They're not in a local church, but they love Jesus and they want to integrate their faith into leadership development, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the way of thinking about it. And what we've learned is not only is it really helpful in terms of discipleship and rooting learning in the context of ministry, but it's also way better. Like it's genuinely more effective. You end up with we're able to actually track the students that we've graduated over the past 12 years compared to prior to that, and on the normal stuff like theological acumen and ability to study the Bible, all that stuff is the same, right? But their actual ability to put into practice that stuff is way higher. And so it's not only better discipleship, it's actually better learning is what we've learned.
Yeah. Learning that changes character, that transforms the student. Talk about how competency is measured. There's got to be some way where you say this person has hit this benchmark in competency. Talk about
we just
how
have
that,
you look at everybody and tell us what. No.
Talk about what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, because for us, everything comes back to discipleship, right? And so in our world, if you're going to be assessing someone and they're looking at content, character, and craft, then the only way to do that is to have a relationship with them. And discipleship happens in community. So in our world, every student has a mentor team, has a group of people that are walking with the student throughout their entire degree. So that, say you're my mentor, a year from now, I've been working with you on biblical study and theology, but also on practice and on ministry and all these different things. A year from now, when I give a sermon and you say to me, that was really bad. or the theology was good, but you need to think about this differently. Or like we've had it happen, like you did a sermon on the fruit of the Spirit, but you're angry all the time. Maybe we need to talk about that. If I've been with you for a year and you say that to me, I'm going to receive it very differently than if I've only known you for a week, right? Yeah. And so that relational, longitudinal nature is a super important part. So we have a mentor team that's working with students over time so that you actually know the person you're working with. And then for every outcome, was what we call them, so biblical studies could be an outcome, or collaboration, whatever, there are what we call performance indicators. So they're kind of lists or statements, they're behaviors, attitudes, skills, dispositions that can be observed. And so we're really trying to observe, I'm going to look at you over a period of time with these indicators. Now, what makes us a little bit different is we allow the mentor teams to customize those indicators based on the student's ministry context. Because if you're a pastor in the middle of San Antonio, your context is going to be a little different than if you're a pastor in the middle of Berlin, which we have students who are doing that, right? Or we have one student, they were I think they're a graduate now, they were a Filipino missionary in Saudi Arabia. Very different context than San Antonio, right? There's going to be some similarities, but there's a lot of difference. And so if we just say to the person in San Antonio, you have to do the exact same thing as the person in Saudi Arabia, we're failing somebody.
Demands of ministry are a little different. I mean, ministry in some ways is similar, but
the gospel doesn't change.
Doesn't change, but methodologies, understanding context, culture,
how leadership
language,
works, all of those things. Yeah.
Not everybody uses Robert's Rules of Order.
That's right. We don't actually. Our school doesn't use them. And so that's
you can't go to another country and measure their business meetings based on Robert's Rules of Order.
Exactly. That's a perfect example of what we call relevance.
Yeah.
And so we have that list, right? We have an indicator list. We have all the things. But the real measurement is in the context of a relationship with a mentor team, using those as a guide. Yeah. And that's important.
And, the mentor part, 2 Timothy 2:2, Paul talks about giving to Timothy, who's able to give to faithful men, who's able to give to others. You have those multiple generations. That's a great principle. Just thinking through how you're explaining the difference of Kairos and some of the other seminaries, like what I went through. You went to class. That's the only time. Sometimes you had contact with your professor. It wasn't a mentor relationship, because you had to get out and go get your kids or go do whatever. You had life, but there was some disconnection between life and your studies. Your studies was one thing, but I like the Kairos part of mentorship. 2 Timothy 2:2. It's much more integrated, and that's why we as an association we have a lot of pastors and other leaders that would like to go to something that's affordable, something that's cohort-based, competency-driven. It's a different style. The outcomes hopefully are going to be deeper in life change for the leaders. Talk about cohorts.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
So because we have such a broad and diverse and geographically distributed community, sometimes people think, oh, you're just an online school. I'm like, well, actually, no. We're just a distributed community. So we actually have cohorts in Brazil. So the students are getting together. They're meeting with faculty. They're not on a campus. They're not taking class, but they're a group of people that are talking together. And
same language, same culture, same context.
Right? We have that in Sioux Falls, and we have that in Texas, and so the way cohorts work is you can have a group of students who are like, we're going to work through this program together because discipleship happens in community, right? And so some of our cohorts, the students will actually get together weekly or monthly. We have a group in Boise that gets together once a month, and so that's how rather than I go to class every week, it's a communal engagement every week, every month, or whatever. But we don't prescribe how the cohort has to work, as much as say, well, you're gonna work on these things, right? You're gonna do biblical studies. You're not gonna get a Master of Divinity and study installing blinds. That's not how it's gonna work.
Yeah.
But you could install blinds and then talk about the theological impact of serving other people. But you're gonna get to the theology stuff. Yeah. So the cohorts are really valuable, and our partners get to kind of structure what those cohorts look like.
Well, we in our association some time ago became familiar with Kairos University, liked the style, liked the deliverability of it, the flexibility. You're still hitting the main target, but it's flexible. And we as an association, not quite a year ago, but some time ago, decided this is the direction that that we want to go. And we're looking forward to having a campus here in San Antonio that we're a part of. Our first interest meeting, we had 25 people that showed up.
Wow.
That was, we were praying for enough just to start one cohort. And then we had 25. We hired a guy named David Garcia to be our contact person, who is really going to be focused on Kairos and the implementation of it and the oversight of it. So we're very excited about this year and years in the future. It when someone listens to our conversation, what type of person should consider being a part of Kairos? If you were giving an appeal.
If I was giving an appeal. So I have kind of two pieces to that. So a short answer is, if you love Jesus and want to study more about what that means, then Kairos is for you, right? We have something that would work well, right? Yeah. We have a thing called a discipleship path, which is $25 a month, and it's just you engaging in discipleship, right, with a community. So
a local church could
anybody
open up a group like that.
Correct.
And
we have several that do.
You know, what we're seeing, especially last year that's carried into this year, is the focus on spiritual formation, that being so important, not just head knowledge like you talked about, but the actual character that carries on day to day, the life change that takes place.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's not rocket science. It's discipleship.
That's right.
being the basis.
One of my mentors said, if you are a pastor, the thing that's probably going to derail your ministry isn't how much you know about the Bible.
Yeah. It's
your formation and your character.
Yeah.
And so local churches could leverage things to lean into formation. You're exactly right. So that's where I start. If you love Jesus and want to know more about what that means, then Kairos can help.
Great.
And we'd love to walk with anybody. If you're like, I think I want to earn a degree. I think I'm being called into some sort of leadership, or this is the direction that God is leading me. The things that people who thrive in Kairos, what tends to be true about them is a willingness to be humble. Right. We're going to put you with a group of people, right? You're going to have a mentor team. So one of our early students came in, and he's like, I know I need some work on biblical studies and maybe church history, but I don't think he was aware of how much work he needed. So when he got his first feedback from his mentor team, like, that was your sermon was like presented well, but it was a little bit of heresy. And I don't think he was ready to receive that yet. Yeah. Right. And so sometimes a level of humility is super important. Like, you're going to submit yourself to a group of people. And so there's a level of humility that's super helpful. And then it does take some self-motivation. Like, the beauty of competency-based is it's competency-based. Maybe the blessing is competency-based. The curse is it's competency-based. Yeah. So if you don't, no one is going to give you a syllabus that says on Tuesday you have to do this, and on Wednesday you have to do that. We have scheduled learning experiences that can help with some of that stuff if that's the way you like to learn. But if you're waiting for somebody to tell you what to do, that's going to be a challenge.
Self-motivation, self-starter.
That's important. It's helpful. We as a school, like part of accreditation is we actually have to provide that stuff. We actually have to have faculty-directed learning and all that stuff. So it's all there. But even still, the way I talk about it is you have to be willing to take ownership of your own development. Mm-hmm. If you're passively engaging in this, you're not going to get as much out. You're still going to go through the process, and we're going to help you. But if you're actively participating as a student in this process, you're going to get a lot more out of it.
You know what's interesting about the name, and I'm sure you guys chose the name Kairos because of the meaning in the Greek language. Mm-hmm. Chronos meaning time, like a clock, but Kairos being a moment, a significant moment in time. Mm-hmm. Like there are like Moses at the burning bush, mm-hmm. life-changing moments that God has in our. What a great name for a university.
That was exactly why we did it. It's the moments in time that naturally encourage integrated learning is the phrase that we use.
And we all need those.
We do.
Epiphanies, where we have an experience with God that changes the direction, our course.
And our whole thought from the very beginning was, what if education, what if discipleship, what if theological education was just built around that?
Could be that
Turns
moment.
out that's when we learn the most anyway, is in those moments. Well, what if we just leverage those moments for a program rather than assuming we can create those moments through chronological classes?
Well, we're going to put contact information for Kairos on the screen. David Garcia, obviously, is going to be our contact, and we'll put his information on. We would love to have you come back after we've been doing this for some time. Have you come back and visit, shoot another video, talk about where you are as a leader, and then where the university is as implementation, and where SABA is in our development. We're just getting started. 2025 is going to be a really good year.
Awesome.
Thank you once again for your time, for being here in San Antonio. I know you come a long ways away from South Dakota, so thank you.
But I escaped the snow, so I'm happy.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not cold for you, but it is for us.
It's beautiful.
But thank you once again for being here.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here.